First, let's just indulge slightly more on those Chelsea years and your brothers in arms, in actual fact, and Hutch and Osgood in particular.
Yeah, great subject. Hutch and Oz were. I've never seen anything like it. Any football club I've been at. It was if you can imagine two players being thrown together, one from the Southern League. The Southern League in those days were for players who had either retired and they gone to last like putting a horse out the stud really. Yeah. And for older players and for younger players come through, they probably put them in to toughen them up because that was one tough league, Yeah. I'd see my brother playing it, and my brother played against Hutch in that league, and I was speaking to my friend Jeff Powell, who played with my brother. We did a podcast together, and I swear, I said, Jeff, I wouldn't have gone down that route. If I would have got turned away at the top level, then I would have gone window cleaning with my father. There's no way I'd have played. I wouldn't have gone out in the Southern League and played, mate. But Hutch came from the Southern League, and he brought the Southern League into our Chelsea team, and that's what we needed. Ossie needed someone along. I mean, Ossie could handle himself. Don't get me wrong, but Hutch was like his minder. Ossie was bigger than him, taller than him, and he could look after himself. Osgood, but Hutch watched his back wherever he went, all over the field. And if anyone, I've seen Hutch many a time just glare at centre halves when they hit Ossie, and I remember the instance at Nottingham Forest when big Sammy Chapman did something, and he's a big mean centre half, and in a flurry in 60 seconds, Sammy was carried off on a stretcher, and Hutch was walking beside him with a broken arm, being red carded. But that's how tough he was, Hutch, But he brought that into our team and give us that. I wouldn't say he was inspiring, but he was a great outlet for us. When Charlie and I couldn't play, we could just throw it up in the air, and there would be Hutch,
Now, many years later, you bumped into Sammy, and you recalled the story about that incident with him, didn't you?
I did. I reminded him that he forgot. Yeah, Sammy kind of he blanked that one. He smiled. I think. But no, I've got to say that. I laugh. I don't laugh about it. I smile about it because I loved Hutch. I loved him dearly, and he went off the rails a bit. We all went off the rails in certain ways, but there's a certain limit. But he took it to the ultimate limit, But on the field, I don't think there was a centre half in the country 1-on-1 that would have got the better of Hutch.
Now, going back to that game that you and your dad watched your brother John play for Guildford against Burton, your dad was absolutely enamoured with Hutch. I read your piece. You do some wonderful writings in your on your Facebook page and then on your official page as well. And I love the way that, because when you wrote the Working Man's Ballet, it really is, you read between the lines, like you used to play the ball between the lines, and you almost feel as though you're there at the time, and you can imagine your dad walking back through the door and talking about this player, and your mum says, blimey, I've never heard you say that about another player apart from Alan and John before. And that's the impact, isn't it?
Well, no, it was just. I was a kid. I actually weren't in the game, Paul. But,
right. Okay.
I was playing myself on, in Chelsea reserves or youth team or whatever. My brother was going to sign pro and under Doherty, and Doherty reneged on the deal, and led to problems with him and my father. But my old man knew what he was doing. you read the thing about he went up for the coaching thing, and
Yeah.
he walked out on, they asked him to make a cup of tea, and he for everyone, and he says no. He says, I don't even do that at home. I haven't come here to make tea. I've come here to get a badge, and he walked out. So that, I think that's where I probably got it without knowing it. But this particular morning, it was a Sunday morning as usual. His best mate was a fella called Arthur Bell, and he would come round and see. He was Chelsea mad. We were Fulham mad. He shouldn't have been talking about that in our kitchen, because we were Fulham. And he was Jimmy Greaves mad, and he was always on about Jimmy Greaves. And my dad had stopped him. All right, Arthur, enough's enough. He says, you wait till Alan wears his number 8 shirt. You'll see a player. And he says, oh, by the way, I see a fella play yesterday against John, and he didn't rave about him.
Yeah.
He just told him exactly what it was. He just come out. He said, because my father was supposed to have been a bit of a handful on the field, and I suppose that was what he caught his eye, especially in that league, in that Southern League. You really had to be able to handle yourself, and as I say, I see a couple of matches, and it was quite scary. And he just said, there's absolute, this kid could be anything. He was no Osgood. He was a complete opposite of Osgood. He was never going to be a Jimmy Greaves. His control wasn't great. He was a raw. Actually, that's what I think my dad might have said. He's raw, and there's no telling what he could be if a good manager, if someone like Waddington had got hold of him, he'd have made him into. He'd have got the very best out of him, let's put it that way. And I think Hutch would have played a lot longer under Waddington, because he would have sat him down and said, look now, Ian, you don't get no medals. You don't get for putting your head where you shouldn't. Fools rush in.
Yep.
Don't get your head kicked off. Don't go in there. Don't, be a bit cagier about it, where Hutch would just rush in and smash defenders and go in between. You've never seen anyone so brave and irresponsible, mate. It scared me. He really scared me, and it was, and his career was for somebody who was legendary at Chelsea. He only played for about 18 months.
Yeah, it's almost like a tragedy, isn't it? And that leads us to our first record from the Bee Gees, Tragedy. And we're still going to stay with Hutch, because his career, it was a bit of a tragedy, wasn't it? The way that, as you've alluded to, he got injured where there's times he shouldn't have gone in. He almost caused riots on the pitch as well, when he pushed Billy Bremner over in that replay. And
well, he gave. I remember the scene. I watched that cup final replay. I was in a blur.
Yeah.
Through missing it, and I was really upset, and I couldn't handle the situation really. Mm-hmm. I'd seen the replay once, and Bremner was on his knees, and Hutch just looked down at him, and I could read his lips. And he just was kind of telling him that, look, that this wasn't all about Leeds. We really give it to Bremner, and you see the one where Dave Mackay picked him up. Well, Hutch was telling him verbally that that he was kind of warning him. It was like a gangster movie, really. That this is your one last chance. You will get it, Billy. And he like mimicked with his hand. At Bremner, and Bremner was on his knees, and that could have turned the game, because things like that in games, and because people like Bremner and Giles, they're okay when they're intimidating people, and but Leeds were bullies, there's no doubt about it. But when they couldn't bully you, you were on an even playing field, and Hutch kind of made that very clear to them. And he was a fantastic leader. He scored the equaliser at Wembley, and then he went on. He took the throw. He threw it for a million miles for the winner. As I say, he was not the most talented footballer in the world. He wouldn't get in a Manchester City or Liverpool team today, because he couldn't play that lovely intricate football they play. The lovely 1-2s and all that, but. when you needed him, mate, he was a great get-out ball. You know, if ever I got in trouble on the field and it was too tight and there was nothing on, Hutch was always on the back of my mind, you know, and he would spring to the front of my mind, and I'd just put it up there, and there he'd be, you know.
And also tragedy in the last time that you saw the big fella as well. It was, heartbreaking, wasn't it?
Oh, it was. I had just come out of not long been out of my coma, and I've been through all that trauma, but I was pretty much fine, you know.
Yeah.
I came through. That they were frightened. I had a blood clot on the brain, and that worried them for a while. And a lot of people said that I didn't have no brain, but that's another story. But I kind of came through, and I was going along all right. And I heard that Hutch was in hospital, and I said to my uncle, I was on my crutches at the time, and I said, we must go and see him, you know, a bit worried about him, blah, blah. I hadn't seen him for a while, obviously. And I got there, and he still had his film star good looks.
Yeah.
He looked absolutely, it was like a film scene when I walked into the ward. He looked fantastic. I thought he was kidding me, Paul. He looked at me and he smiled out the corner of his eye, and I didn't, and then I realized that he didn't really recognize me, and it was, you know, he had such a cheeky way about him, Hutch, and it was a lovely, lovely fellow. He drove in. The story goes he drove into Stamford Bridge on a motorbike with a leather jacket, thinking he was like Jack Nicholson, you know.
Yeah.
And he was told straight away, and within 6 months we had bred a monster. I think that's the right way how it goes. And but he was a lovely lad. And we walked out of the hospital, and I said to my Uncle George, I said, we got to get out of here. And then the nurse said, please don't, we can't handle him. Don't go. I said, well, I can't handle him, love. I said, I don't think he realises that he doesn't know I am. And it was a very, very sad moment. And the last time I see him, and I went up the next time, I would just hugged his girlfriend at the memorial or whatever, you know. And it was a very sad moment. It was a absolute tragedy, because not only his career, you know, you can imagine coming from Burton Albion, and you win the FA Cup with Chelsea. He must have went home to Burton and been a hero, you know. And it all ended in tears.
But he was a teetotal, and he was a family-loving guy with a beautiful wife that he adored, and vice versa. And you know, within 18 months, you turned him into a womanising alcoholic, hadn't you, you guys?
Well, that was they were. I must take responsibility for that. You can't say that.
But that's what Chelsea was about, and the King's Road was about. And what I'm trying to get at, Al, is, you know, when players are born to play at clubs and are conducive with what they've got to play at clubs, you know, if you're not that kind of player, that club and that lifestyle can consume you and really change you in an instant.
Well, Paul, you've hit something on the head there. I mean, it wasn't so much if you was a good player or not at Chelsea. It was if you could stand the test of the King's Road.
Yep.
If you could overcome the King's Road, and I mean, Charlie Cook and Tommy Baldwin down the King's Road, they'd be arm wrestling with Richard Harris, Peter O'Toole, Oliver Reed at 3 o'clock in the morning down the King's Road, drunk with these people, and then come in training and tell us the story. Where you been? He said, and Charlie would say, oh, he's been with Richard Harris, the man called Horse, you know. And you know, at 3 o'clock in the morning, and Charlie came down from Scotland. He was the closest thing ability wise to George Best, and he was amazing talent. But he went down that King's Road, and you could see it had such an effect on him. There was moments of his magic, like in the cup final replay, but that one bit of magic came from him. He still had the magic, but and then he came off the booze completely, and I played against him in America for California, and he had that sparkle back, and you know he was an amazing talent. But the Kings Road, he couldn't. He took on the Kings Road, and he beat him.
I think the Kings Road beat many, as did Chelsea. Your iconic team beat many. Hutch, although he did go to Chelsea, almost never, well, it wasn't an almost, but your dad did tell Bobby Robson on a train journey with you on the way to Highbury that Fulham should have a look at him as he did with you. But strangely, Fulham didn't with both, and you both ended up Chelsea legends. But I suppose that's the way it is, isn't it? Some listen, some don't.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I know that's. I think
Yeah,
that is a way of life.
yeah.
Going back to yesterday with this thing with Jeff, I did. You know, we talk about how one man can change your path in life. One manager, wrongly so, which I'm so against management in that way and suits. They can ruin you, and one man shouldn't have that much power. And my father, very innocently, Bobby Robson was manager of Fulham. We got on a train after a match at Arsenal. We took there for my education. I watched George Easton. And we got on the train, and Bobby Robson, being the manager of Fulham, my father, he wasn't one of those people that were going to pester you or nothing. He was very much. I'm very much like him. And he just said, Bobby, can I have a minute of your time if I can tell you about this kid I see on Saturday play against my son? And he said, if I can say, you should go send someone to go and see him. He said, because we need somebody up front to play that. I think they had Alan Clark at one time. They had Rodney Marsh at one time. Malcolm MacDonald had a spell. But Hutch would have been, he would have been, if he kept himself fit and gone to Fulham. And my dad kind of threw in a sideline with him and said, oh, by the way, this is my son. He's apprentice at Chelsea, and his ambition is to play for Fulham. And it went over his head. It was sad, really. It was. And then years later, he came on a tour with Stoke City. This is 10, 12 years later, and 15 years later. And he'd been England manager and everything else. And he was rated one of the greatest coaches in the world, Bobby Robson. And he looked at me a couple of times. He was up with us for about 8 days, and I couldn't get the strength to speak to him. I would just. I thought, if you can't speak to my father, then you can't speak to me, kind of thing, you know.
But one man that did always listen, and that leads us into Sea Biscuit territory, was Tony Waddington, because your story is very much like Sea Biscuit. So let's indulge firstly about Sea Biscuit and tell the listeners who Sea Biscuit was, because before I started doing the podcast with you, Alan, talking to you and reading your scriptures, I didn't know who Sea Biscuit was, but he changed the attitude of a nation, didn't he? It's incredible.
Well, it's for those who are not into horse racing. I love my horse racing. I'm not a total nutcase about it, but I do. They fascinate. Horses fascinate me. I once had a horse. We rented a horse off Red Hollinshead called My Lifetime Lady, who's the greatest, the only female that broke my heart, really, when I lost her. And I love watching them on the gallops. I love watching them. They fascinate me. They've got these legs which I don't understand how they carry that much weight on and they're so honest. They're so brave. They're wonderful animals. And I read about Sea Biscuit. I went to Sea Biscuit Day in Santa Anita when I come out of hospital, and I followed the story, see the film, and yeah, the story was so much like what happened to me with Tony, because it was a horse. It was in the Depression, wasn't it? Wall Street had crashed. The jockeys, everybody had gone skint apart from, the certain ones who were fortunate, and unbeknown to anyone, this you couldn't plan it. Again, like you couldn't plan what me and Tony coming together. It was just unseen what Tony done, how he paid so much money for me when I was broken down, and paid a record fee for a player that was out of form and falling out of love with the game and going nowhere. And he sees something in me like Tom Smith see in Sea Biscuit, and he said in the film that the fella that spoke, the narrator, he said that Tom Smith they looked through each other, him and the horse. They walked the horse through the dark in a training session, and he caught it was on film. He looked at him and he told Charles Howard, the man with the money, he says, I think we should buy this horse. And he said, but the horse is broken down. He says, I can fix him. And he fixed him, and he got his confidence back, because it was a top-rated horse as a young horse, and he got injured. And then what happened was, it was much like me again. I got injured and I got ignored. I got pushed into the background, and no treatment and lack of treatment. So I fell out with a manager. I fell out with 2 managers over it. And this can happen. And Sea Biscuit could have so easily just been forgotten. Them that they put it in races that were worth like £100 races, and it went on to win the £1 million race.
Yeah.
All because of this one man that saved him. And it was Sea Biscuit. Is such an inspiration. And it gives, as Charles Howard said, if a horse can do this to our nation, then our nation can pick itself up, because a little horse like this has proved that he can beat Man of War, who was a massive horse. It was an unbeatable horse. Well, he proved that it wasn't. This little horse who got it, he was brought back to life. He got fit again, and he broke his leg again, and then he came back again, and he proved he won the Santa Anita Derby, the handicap there, and it's a wonderful story. It really is.
In many ways, it's the greatest story ever about the triumph of an underdog, isn't it?
Yeah. I've got the other. The one about the great, they say the greatest horse that won all them races. I've actually got it over the back there, sitting there. But Sea Biscuit was, they can argue. You can talk about footballers and say who was the best player. No one will ever know who's the best. But as regards what Sea Biscuit went through, and the heartbreak it must. It really does make you think, if only a horse could talk.
Yeah. And
if that horse could talk and tell you the pain that it went through, and how he could tell, like I speak of Tony Waddington, that horse would talk about Tom Smith and tell you that he saved not only his life, but it took him to such heights,
But that's what Tom did, didn't he? He whispered to the horse. I mean, this was, to all intents and purposes at that time, a crazy horse. The horse would get mad. It would bite people. But Tom, just as you say, they looked at each other. They connected with each other. He fed the horse. He whispered in the horse. And he built the horse to be the greatest horse on the planet. It just is an incredible story.
In the film, that it was kicking the doors down in his stall, and they were putting all animals in to be with him to try and calm him down, and these animals were being thrown over the top of the stall and flying over people's heads. And then one day he walked in and brought this great big horse, lovable horse, and he sat, a big white horse, and he sat it down next to Sea Biscuit, and it calmed him down. And it kind of, when you think they don't talk, it's like probably a dolphin. I don't know. They reckon they send these signs out. And someone was telling me the other day about that. They took their kid over to, this little girl to see the dolphins, because she's she's got the same thing as my little nephew, and it kind of cured the little girl to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Where just getting in the water with going around with the dolphins, and the effect it had on this little girl, and it makes you wonder. And the horses, they have this wonderful way about them. I've spoke to several jockeys, and that you can understand. I fell in love with a horse when I had my horse. I mean, I couldn't wait to get up in the morning and go down the yard and see her and all that, and it was just it's more than any. I've got to say, mate, it's more than any woman.
Mm.
A 2-year-old, she was a 2-year-old filly, and if I'd have had a daughter, I couldn't have showed her any more affection. It was just incredible the way they are. You can see why people fall in love. You can see why people pay I mean, a lot of people pay money to earn money out of them, but it's an incredible. You can see why people go there and they stand around a paddock and watch these wonderful animals walk by.
But it is incredible that, if you treat people or treat animals or treat anything with the respect, with the love, with the tender care, it's quite incredible what results that you can get. And that is pretty much what Tony Waddington did to you. Little old wine drinking me, Dean Martin, that's a song, and a song that reminds you of the time when you went back to Chelsea for Stoke, scored the goal that got Stoke into Europe with a 1-0 away win, and that you were waiting for the train, and the gaffer turns up with a crate of champagne and sorts all you boys out and sticks an extra one in your bag, looks at you, smiles, just like Tom did to Sea Biscuit, and you guys were just up and running, and you could. I don't think there's an argument. I don't think anybody would say anything different, that you played your best football at Stoke, and that was because of a guy that connected with you, that got to the inner Alan Hudson, water pitches for you, done everything for you, put you on that football pitch, made you you made yourself the greatest midfield player in the world at that time. And how could you not repay somebody with that faith in you? And I think that's a great lesson in life for all of us.
SRBMedia.
But I think there's a lesson to be learned here, because I have a lot of problem with my former teammates at Stoke City.
Yeah, I know.
And they weren't very happy when Tony brought me into the club.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't like that. They didn't like what they read about me. They didn't know me. I played against them a few times. They thought I was, I don't know. I'm very self-confident. I'm not arrogant.
Yeah.
And what they don't understand, these people, and I've told them, and I write certain things, and I send it to them, actually, and I make sure that they see it, that what Tony did for me, they thought Tony was going out of his way to do this just for me, because he paid a lot of money for me, and they thought that he had to make it work for me because his head was on the line, because he paid then £250,000, which was a record signing, the most money ever paid. They thought he was under pressure, so he had to get the best of it. Well, that was nonsense. That was absolute, complete nonsense. What they didn't understand was, and Tony told me one day, I went in to see him one day about one of our players complaining about he wouldn't let him, Jackie Marsh, they wouldn't let him go. We were sitting having a pint, and Jackie said he won't let me go to Los Angeles in the summer. And I said, well, what's all that about, Jack? And I wasn't captain of the team, and we were sitting next door to Tony's office, basically. He was in the social club. And I said, what's all this about, Jackie? And I said, before you go any further, if you badmouth him, mate, we don't drink together anymore. Yeah, I said, because you're out of order. If you're going to say something about somebody, say it to their face. I said, so don't sit here doing this. I said, but you just tell me. And he told me, and I got up and I walked out the bar, and I walked in and knocked on Tony's door. It was only like not even a minute's walk. It was next door to the ground. And I knocked on his door and I sat down with him, and he couldn't. The only time I'd been in his office, apart from a Saturday, to pick up my tickets, and I was surprised to see him. I'd only ever seen him in a restaurant and a bar. I'd never seen him anywhere else. And he went, "Oh, Alan, what can I do for you?"
To listen to the rest of this podcast, please go to www.patreon.com/SRBmedia, or just follow the links in the description. Thank you.